Discussions on the glories of Sri Vrindavan Dhama. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pacharine Nivishesha Shunyavadi Pastrita Deshatarine. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. So today I would like to conclude our study on the Six Goswamis of Vrindavan by discussing the glories of Srila Raghunatha Bhatta Goswami. Yes, and we'll begin with his identity in the spiritual world in Goloka Vrindavan. In Kavikona Pura's Gora Gunadesha Dipika, verse 185, we hear, quote, Ragamanjari appeared as Srila Raghunatha Bhatta Goswami, who lived in a cottage by the shore of Radhakund, unquote. And further research reveals that Ragamanjari's eternal form is that of a 13-year-old girl. She's golden complexioned, like a champak flower. She dresses in pure white clothes, like the feathers of a swan. And she's very dear to Rupa Goswami. Early in the morning at Yavat, after the other girls bathe and dress Sri Radha, Ragamanjari's service is to smear Sri Radha's body with sandalwood pulp, camphor, kumkum, and musk. So this is the eternal identity of Raghunatha Bhatta Goswami in the spiritual world as Ragamanjari. So you could say, like all children, Raghunatha Bhatta Goswami's story begins with his mother and father. In Chaitanya Charitamrita Adi Leela 1610, we're first introduced to his father. His name is Tapan Mishra. Sedeshi Vipranama Mishra Tapana Nishchaya Karite Nare Sajja Shadana. Quote, in East Bengal there was a Brahmana named Tapana Mishra who could not ascertain the objective of life and how to attain it. Unquote. But this Tapana Mishra very soon received some special mercy. For one night, a Brahmana appeared to him in a dream and told him to go meet Nimai Pandit, who was living in Navadvip. That's how he would learn the objective of life, by meeting Nimai Pandit in Navadvip. The exact verse is, Shwapne means dream, Shwapne eke viparakahe sunaha tapana Nimani Pandita Pashe Karaha Gamana. Quote, Tapan Mishra, being thus bewildered, was directed by a Brahmana in a dream to go to Nimai Pandit, or Caitanya Mahaprabhu, unquote. And Srila Prabhupada says in Adi Leela 10.152, at that meeting, Tapan Mishra was, quote, favored by Lord Caitanya Mahaprabhu and received Harinam initiation. Yeah, the first time he met Mahaprabhu, Nimai Pandit gave him Harinam initiation. And at that time, this devotee, Tapana Mishra, was so enamored by Nimai Pandit, he wanted to give everything up. He was a family man, but he wanted to give everything up and just live with Mahaprabhu. But Mahaprabhu instructed him rather to go live in Kashi, in Varanasi. And he hinted that he would later come and meet him there. It's interesting because we know that Kashi or Varanasi is the seat of the impersonalists, the Mayavadis. But in Chaitanya Charitamrita Adi Leela 10.16.18, in a purport, Prabhupada explains everything very clearly. He says, quote, by asking Tapan Mishra to go to Varanasi, Lord Chaitanya indicated that in the future he would accept sannyas and that he would then teach Srila Sanatana Goswami the science of Krishna consciousness in Varanasi. And at that time, Tapan Mishra would take advantage of the opportunity to learn the objective of life and the real process for attaining it, unquote. I sort of paraphrased it there, but that's what Srila Prabhupada was saying in the purport. So, he's initiated. And Tapa Mishra and his wife, they moved to Varanasi. And soon after, the illustrious Raghunatha Bhatta Goswami was born, or well, we say appeared, in Varanasi. Yesterday I was reading that any birth or death in Varanasi is considered very auspicious. And how is that? Because it's described in Shastra that Mahadev, Lord Shiva, is forever sitting in Varanasi. And he's chanting Ramanam, it says. It means he's chanting the holy names of Lord Ramachandra. So it's said that anyone who dies in Varanasi is purified by, quote, the waves of Ramachandra's names carried through the atmosphere from the lips of Lord Shiva to the ears of a dying man. From the lips of Lord Shiva, Rama, 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 to the ears of a dying man. And it is a tradition in India, I know, that many people, when they get notice they're going to leave their bodies, they go to Varanasi and they leave their bodies there, knowing that Shiva is purifying the atmosphere by chanting the holy names. Of course, Varanasi is a holy place to begin with, but made more holy by the presence of Lord Shiva. And therefore, one of the most famous places in Varanasi is the burning ghats. I've seen those burning ghats several times. You take a boat down Varanasi is right on the banks of the Ganges, so you take a boat down the Ganges and you pass by a huge burning ghat. There's like 30, 40 people at a time. Their bodies are being burned there. So yes, very, very auspicious place. Of course, Raghunatha Bhatta Goswami's birth and eventual departure are completely transcendental. Doesn't need the blessings of Lord Shiva there, because he's Nitya Siddha. He's an eternally liberated soul, as we were hearing about his service in the spiritual world. And just by accepting and understanding that fact alone, that these personalities, like Raghunatha Bhatta Goswami, are untinged, untouched by any material inebrities. They come solely for the purpose of enlightening us in Krishna consciousness. Just to understand that fact of their transcendental nature, you can be promoted to the spiritual world. Narottam Das Thakur confirms this in his song Gauranga Dutipada. He sings Gaurangera Shange Ghane, Nitya Siddha Kori Mane, Sejai Barjenda Shuta Pash, quote, simply by understanding that the associates of Lord Caitanya are eternally free from material contamination, one can immediately be promoted to the transcendental abode of Lord Krishna. Wow. So Nitya Siddha means that Raghunatha Bhatta Goswami is eternally liberated. What's more, he's a very intimate servant of Srimati Radharani, Raghamanjari. But he's so kind that he came to be amongst us. We have to meditate on that. It's actually quite amazing. One time I heard Gaur Govinda Maharaj, Srila Gaur Govinda Maharaj, my godbrother, say that there's two types of eternally liberated souls who come from Goloka Vrindavan to the earth planet to enlighten us in Krishna consciousness. One comes of his own accord, and the other is ordered by Krishna. This mission of delivering the conditioned souls is very dear to the Lord, so much so that he comes himself again and again, or once in a day of Brahma. So when you have something that's very dear to you, a mission that's very dear to you, and then you have to entrust it to someone, you choose the best man. So we see that Well, we think like that our Srila Prabhupada was chosen by Krishna to come here. Actually, I remember now, one of Srila Prabhupada's secretaries personally told me that one time Srila Prabhupada told him, and I quote, Prabhupada said, "I did not want to come to this nasty place." That summarizes the material world. "I did not want to come to this nasty place, but Krishna ordered me." Krishna said, "You just go down there and write books on the science of Krishna consciousness, and I will arrange everything for you." So, who is Srila Prabhupada? He's personally chosen by the Lord. And that's why we sing, or we bow down and we pray so many times a day. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Pashtaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namane. We say Krishna Pashtaya Bhutale. What does Krishna Pashtaya Bhutale mean? Pashtaya means very dear, or even more so, it means very intimate. And Bhutale refers to the earth. So Krishna Pashtaya Bhutale refers to someone who's very dear, is very intimate with Krishna, whom he has sent to the earth planet. So when we bow down and chant the prana mantras to Srila Prabhupada, we should be thinking like that. We should be conscious in that way. It's not just that we bow down as a practice, but from the heart, we Krishna Pashtaya Bhutale. He's so dear. So as Raghunatha Bhatta Goswami grew up, he heard a lot about Lord Caitanya Mahaprabhu from his father. And it's described, therefore, the whole family was waiting for Mahaprabhu to come to Varanasi. The whole family was waiting for him to come. It's said that every day, Raghunatha Bhatta Goswami, as a young boy, he would ask his father, "Pita, when is Nimai Pandit going to come?" He referred to him as Nimai Pandit because at least up until this time, the family, Tapan Mishra's family, they didn't know that Lord Caitanya had taken sannyas. So in his youth, he was known as Nimai Pandit. So he'd say every day, "Pita, when is Nimai Pandit going to come?" So some weeks, months, years actually passed. And then one day, it's said in scripture, Tapan Mishra was bathing at the Mani Karnika Ghat. There's many, many ghats, so many ghats along the riverbank there in Varanasi. You can go from one ghat to the next. So he was bathing at the Mani Karnika Ghat on the bank of the Ganges, and he suddenly heard this huge uproar of kirtan, people chanting Hare Krishna nearby. Now this was unusual because this was Varanasi. What did they say there? Tat Vamasmi, thou art that Brahman. You are God. So this was part of the austerity that Tapan Mishra had to endure in living there in Varanasi. But as we'll see, it was all worth it. That he had to hear these impersonal shlokas. So now he hears this kirtan, this roaring kirtan. And as he turned around, he saw a large crowd assembled under a tree, all dancing and chanting. And as he moved forward to that kirtan, under the tree, he saw Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who had finally come to Varanasi. And it's described that he started crying. Hot tears of distress and cold tears of happiness. It's unusual at the same time. Hot tears of distress and cold tears of happiness. Cold tears of happiness because, well, he saw Chaitanya Mahaprabhu after such a long time. But hot tears of distress because he was no longer Nimai Pandit. Nimai Pandit was a very beautiful young boy. Rather now, he was seeing Chaitanya Mahaprabhu with a shaven head and dressed in the robes of a sannyasi. He no longer had his soft, black, curly hair cascading down to his shoulders. He had a shaved head, and he was sitting on a simple cloth on the ground with a begging bowl. Of course, this was meant to be, that Nimai Pandit was to become Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, but for many of his followers it was very painful because they realized at some point that this personality, Nimai Pandit, he's the supreme personality of Godhead, he's the supreme enjoyer, and our enjoyment comes in serving him. But now he's living the life of a renunciate. Why does the supreme enjoyer have to live the life of a renunciate, renounce this material world? Krishna has no attachment to this material world. It's just, he describes it as his inferior energy. But now, Tapan Mishra, he's seeing, Nimai Pandit, whom he fell in love with, as a sannyasi. But it was bound to happen. It's described in Garuda Purana that, quote, Krishna saying, or rather, Shastra saying, in the first part of Kali Yuga, the Supreme Lord, in a golden complexion, will become the husband of Lakshmi. Then he will become a sannyasi and reside near Lord Jagannath. Predicted in the Garuda Purana. In the first part of Kali Yuga, the Supreme Lord, in a golden complexion, will become the husband of Lakshmi. Then he will become a sannyasi and reside near Lord Jagannath. So, as we know, Nimai Pandit was eventually married to Lakshmi, the goddess of fortune. But then he became a sannyasi and eventually resided in Jagannath Puri. It's all described actually in scripture. Prabhupada would often say, no one can claim to be an incarnation unless his pastimes are described in revealed scripture. So seeing Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Tapan Mishra just ran forward and he prostrated himself at the feet of Lord Chaitanya under that tree. And again, I've been to Varanasi. That tree is still alive. That very tree is still alive. If you go to Varanasi, you can take darshan of that tree. It's called Chaitanya Vat, or sometimes they call it Akshaya Vat. And that tree, you could say, it's 500 years, but still it's blooming. One could maybe say that it became eternal and immortal by the touch of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So there under the tree, Tapan Mishra, he spoke with Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And at that time, Lord Chaitanya related to Tapan Mishra how he had left family life and how he was now living the life of a renunciate. And after some time, Mahaprabhu expressed the desire to visit the Bindu Madhava temple. Bindu Madhava temple. I've been there, very beautiful temple, an amazingly beautiful deity. And at that temple, it's just an interesting fact, they do the Abhishek, they do the bathing of the Lord in the morning with open doors. Usually the deities are bathed and dressed, etc., behind closed doors, and then we have the deity greeting. But in this temple in Bindu Madhava, you can sit right there, this ancient deity, and watch the pujaris bathe with all the substances. It's amazing. So Mahaprabhu, he when he was in Varanasi, he would often visit this temple himself. So Tapan Mishra took him there to see Bindu Madhav, and as well as the Vishveshwara Shiva temple. This was a very, very ancient temple of Shiva in Varanasi. Varanasi itself is as old as time, and it's said that the Shiva temple has been there since time immemorial. I've also been there. It's overwhelming. So Vishveshwara, Mahaprabhu went there. And actually, Tapan Mishra took Mahaprabhu, and he'd come with associates, and they went to various holy places around Varanasi. And everywhere they went, they had a roaring kirtan. This was like driving a dagger into the hearts of the Mayavadis, to hear to see these bhaktas chanting and dancing and in ecstasy with Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, the Yuga avatar, although they had not yet realized who he was, they would in due course of time. As we know, Mahaprabhu revealed himself to Prakashananda Saraswati, and the Mayavadis, they all became his devotees. But anyway, as they're going on this Parikrama, it's described that people poured out of their shops and houses just to get a glimpse of Mahaprabhu. He was so beautiful. Srila Gaur Govinda Maharaj used to say that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is Adbhuta Karunya, Adbhuta Madhurya, and Adbhuta Avadharya Leela. That he's wonderfully beautiful, he's wonderfully sweet, and he's wonderfully magnanimous. Adbhuta Karunya, Adbhuta Madhurya, and Adbhuta Avadharya Leela. So finally, Tapan Mishra invited Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to his house, where all the devotees had assembled. And of course, young Raghunath Bhatta was there. Raghunath Bhatta Goswami was there. And at that time it's described he was about 10 years old. And just as Gopal Bhatta Goswami rendered, you remember we discussed, rendered very personal service to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu as a young boy in Sri Rangam. So Raghunath Bhatta Goswami served Chaitanya Mahaprabhu as a young boy in Varanasi. And what was his first service? His first service given to him by his father was to drink the water, the Charnamrita, that his father, Tapan Mishra, had washed the lotus feet of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu with upon his arrival in their house. This is the culture. The culture of welcoming the Lord or his devotees by washing their feet. It's very much part of our Krishna conscious tradition. And it's very helpful for our spiritual progress, because after that water is collected from the feet of the Lord or a spiritual master or a devotee, and what is the benefit when you drink it? Well, that's described in Chaitanya Charitamrita Antilila 1660. Bhaktapada Dhuli Ara, Bhaktapada Jala, Jala means water, Bhakta Bhukta Avashesha Tina Maha Bala. Quote, the dust of the feet of a devotee, the water that has washed the feet of a devotee, and the remnants of food left by a devotee are three very powerful spiritual substances. The dust, the water, and the remnants of food left by a devotee. I've recounted many times, but just very briefly, I remember that one time Prabhupada came to Quatre-Bras-sur, our temple in Paris, and myself and my godbrother Bugarbha Prabhu, we were given the privilege of bathing Srila Prabhupada's lotus feet during a roaring kirtan, and we planned it very carefully. We actually collected extra Lakshmi and bought a silver jug and a silver pot, and we prepared the water with the roses and etc. And when we bathed Prabhupada's feet, and then we took that pot, which you're supposed to throw it to everybody, the water, but we ran upstairs and locked ourselves in the president's office, and we drank that water to every single drop. We were so full, knowing the value of getting that mercy of Srila Prabhupada. Anyway, so Raghunath Bhatta Goswami served Lord Chaitanya very faithfully during that time in Varanasi, a 10-year-old boy. For example, after Chaitanya Mahaprabhu would finishing honoring prasadam, Raghunath Bhatta's would personally distribute his remnants to all the Vaishnavas. He'd wash the plate of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and then he would massage Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's lotus feet with his hands, much like we heard Gopal Bhatta Goswami doing when he was young. On that visit, Lord Chaitanya stayed in the house of Chandrasekhara Acharya, another great devotee, a friend of Tapan Mishra, for 10 days, but he would accept prasadam always at the house of Tapan Mishra, giving this young boy, Raghunath Bhatta, a chance to get some mercy. Now, as Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was leaving, Tapan Mishra ran up to him and said, "Can I join you now? Can I leave home and join you now?" And in Bengal, I asked you the same question, and you sent me here to Varanasi. But now I want to come with you. But Mahaprabhu said, no, you must continue to stay in Varanasi. Yeah. After some time, Lord Caitanya returned to Varanasi from Vrindavan because he'd been coming through Varanasi on his way to Vrindavan. So when he finished his pastimes in Vrindavan, he came back to Varanasi, and it was during this time that he met with Srila Raghunatha Goswami. In a lecture in Bombay, because we refer to a city or a town by its name in the past tense if the name's been changed. In a lecture in Bombay, November 2nd, 1975, Srila Prabhupada said, quote, Sanatana Goswami left Bangladesh and met Caitanya Mahaprabhu in Kashi, Varanasi, where he was then preaching. He was initiated and given the sannyas attire, and for 2 months he was taught on the topics of devotional service. I found that very interesting because it's a Bengali lecture which I had translated, and there Prabhupada said that Mahaprabhu initiated him there and gave him the sannyas attire. And during that time, Mahaprabhu continued to give his mercy to Raghunatha Bhatta Goswami. He received a lot of mercy from Mahaprabhu. Now, just before Lord Caitanya left to go to Puri, he revealed why he had requested Tapan Mishra to live in Varanasi. He said to him, quote, I am coming and leaving from Varanasi simply to increase your hankering for me. It is also my desire that you give your association to the newly converted Mayavadis. Because as I mentioned earlier, during that time, Mahaprabhu had converted Prakrishananda Saraswati and all the Mayavadis. Only he could do that. So he said, I come and go just to increase your hankering for me. Again, we come back to the subject of Vipralambha Bhav. So now it's described that after Lord Caitanya left this time, Raghunath Bhatta Goswami was so deeply attached to him that he cried incessantly day and night. He would just chant, Shri Krishna Chaitanya, Shri Krishna Chaitanya, Shri Krishna Chaitanya. And knowing the heart of Raghunath Bhatta, Mahaprabhu was, knew what he wanted. So he made an arrangement that when the devotees from Varanasi, because Mahaprabhu had, there were a number of devotees there, when the devotees from Varanasi were going to Puri for the next Jagannath Rath Yatra, Raghunath Bhatta, he asked his father if he could go. And his father had to stay in Varanasi, but when his son asked him if he could go, Tapan Mishra said yes. Go see Caitanya Mahaprabhu. Go to Jagannath Puri. And it should be noted at this time that Raghunath Bhatta was extremely intelligent, and like other of the Goswamis, when we discussed their younger years, he'd become a great scholar by this time. He was known as a very great scholar. So it's written that on the way to Jagannath Puri for Rath Yatra with the other Vaishnavas, Raghunath Bhatta Goswami was so ecstatic that he was just crying, fainting, and trembling the whole way to Puri. The medieval poet Radha Ballabh Das, he's a very famous Vaishnava poet. He writes in his book, he has a book called Bharati Raga. So he writes in Bharati Raga, Jaya Bhatta Raghunatha Goshai, Radha Krishna Lila Gune, Divanishi Nahi Jane, Tulana Dibara Nahi Tasi. Quote, All glories to Srila Raghunatha Bhatta Goswami. Absorbed in the pastimes and qualities of Radha and Krishna, he could not understand whether it was day or night. It is not possible to compare him to anyone. He was so absorbed in Krishna consciousness that he couldn't understand if it was day or night. So here's this, we see even as a young boy, he's beginning to manifest these symptoms on his way to Jagannath Puri. Now when Raghunath Bhatta Goswami arrived in Puri, there were many people lining the road to see him because they'd heard how he'd received the mercy of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. It's often said that the fame of a great devotee precedes him, like the light of dawn precedes the sunrise. And we've quoted this following verse before, but it's required now. Rupa Goswami writes in his Vidagdha Madhava 1.1.3, quote, "The transcendently attractive qualities of an exalted devotee popularize his presence everywhere, though he may be hidden from public view, just as musk spreads its fragrance everywhere, though locked away in a tight container." The transcendently attractive qualities of an exalted devotee popularize his presence everywhere, though he may be hidden from public view, just as musk spreads its fragrance everywhere, though locked away in a tight container. Hare Krishna, Rupa Goswami. So although Raghunath Bhatta had been living his life in Varanasi, people already knew about him. His fame had already reached Puri, so they were lining the roads. Now at this time, Lord Caitanya Mahaprabhu was performing his Antya-lila pastimes, his final pastimes on the earth. You could say he'd sufficiently inaugurated the Sankirtan movement by spreading the chanting of Hare Krishna all over India and predicting it would go everywhere. And he'd empowered his immediate followers to start making plans for spreading the glories of the holy names to every town and village. But in Jagannath Puri, he was experiencing his internal reason for appearing on the earth. He was doing that in the house of Kashi Mishra. That's where he was staying. We hear in Chaitanya Charitamrita that Mahaprabhu had two reasons for coming: as the Yuga avatar, to spread the Yuga Dharma of chanting Hare Krishna, and a personal reason that Krishna wanted to understand the loving sentiments of Srimati Radharani, so he took her mood in the personality of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Sri Krishna Chaitanya Radhe Krishna Nai Anga. Krishna appeared, or Radha and Krishna appeared, as the personality of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And in this way, Krishna could experience Radharani's love for Krishna. So this was what Mahaprabhu was doing in Puri. And at that time, he was staying at the house of Kashi Mishra, and his quarters there are called Gambira. Gambira. Fulfilling this inner desire. In Chaitanya Charitamrita, we also hear about that, these two reasons for Mahaprabhu's appearing. Chaitanya Adi Lila 1.4.13, quote, "The Lord's desire to appear was born from two reasons. The Lord wanted to taste the sweet essence of the mellows of love of God, and he wanted to propagate devotional service in the world on the platform of spontaneous attraction. Thus he is known as supremely jubilant and the most merciful of all." Hare Krishna. So he wanted to taste Radharani's love. Actually, it's described as only three persons who experienced that Mahabhava. That's Radharani herself, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and Madhavinda Puri. And what is the nature of that special love that Sri Radha has for Krishna? Well, that's described in a verse from Dankeli Kaumudi by Rupa Goswami. It's a little esoteric, but it's very beautiful. Quote, All glories to Radha's love for Krishna, the enemy of the demon Mura. Although her love is all-pervading, it tends to increase at every moment. Although it's important, it is devoid of pride, and although it is pure, it is always beset with duplicity. Special love. So, this is what Mahaprabhu was doing in Jagannath Puri. This is Antilila. So where did Raghunath Bhatta Goswami go when he arrived in Puri? He went straight to Gambhira. He went to the house of Kashi Mishra, and specifically he went to Gambhira. Means the room. Actually, Gambhira in Sanskrit means very intense, very serious, and very grave. Gambhira. So the Gambhira is the quarters of Mahaprabhu, where he was experiencing the ecstasies of Radha's love for Krishna. It's very confidential. His ecstasies, they're sort of, well, they may be difficult to comprehend. In Gambhira, he's swooning in ecstasy, he's falling on the ground. Sometimes his hands and legs get dislocated, and sometimes they go inside his body, like a tortoise goes within a shell. Sometimes he's frothing and foaming at the mouth. Sometimes he's weeping. Sometimes Mahaprabhu is on the ground. Sometimes his head hits the wall, and sometimes blood streams down his face. Mahaprabhu's face. There's blood on the ground also. This is all very intense, very serious, very grave, Gambhira. And therefore we find these pastimes in the final portion of Chaitanya Charitamrita, in the Antilila part. And we come to this section very gradually by systematically studying Bhagavad Gita, then the 12 cantos of Srimad Bhagavatam, then Chaitanya Charitamrita, Adi Lila, Madhya Lila, and then we get to Antilila. It's very deep and very confidential. Now when Raghunath Bhatta Goswami first entered Gambhira, Mahaprabhu was described in a passive mood, and when he saw Raghunath Bhatta Goswami, he said, "Who are you?" And Raghunath Bhatta Goswami said, "I'm Raghunath." Then Mahaprabhu said, "Who's Raghunath?" And Raghunath Bhatta Goswami replied, "Your one and only servant, Raghunath." Then Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said, "Yes, this is correct, the son of Tapana Mishra." And then Mahaprabhu embraced him. So the question may be, how did Chaitanya Mahaprabhu appear not to recognize Raghunath Bhatta Goswami, whom he'd spent so much time dealing with as a young boy? Well, the acharyas say that before, when Mahaprabhu was dealing with Raghunath Bhatta Goswami, Raghunath Bhatta was a child who had not yet learned the scriptures. But now, after learning the scriptures and becoming famous as a result, as a famous scholar, Mahaprabhu wanted to see if Raghunath Bhatta Goswami had developed any pride. If he had, Raghunath Bhatta Goswami would have probably replied to Lord Chaitanya by saying, "I'm Raghunath, everyone knows me. They were lining the streets to see me as I entered Puri," but he didn't say that. He simply identified himself as Mahaprabhu's servant. This is Vaishnava. Vaishnavas, they have this crest jewel quality of being very humble. It comes in time, it comes naturally. Just like if you're walking, you see a mountain in the distance. It looks very small. But as you come closer and closer and closer to the mountain, you may be overcome with awe and reverence. Oh, this mountain is so great and I am so small. So in the beginning of Krishna consciousness, we're practicing Krishna consciousness, but the sign that we're making advancement is that we begin to realize how great Krishna is. And by realizing how great Krishna is, naturally the quality of humility comes. So you will see humility in every devotee who's making progress in Krishna consciousness, especially in advanced devotees. This humility that I am Jivera Supoya Krishnera Nitya Das. I'm simply the humble servant of the Lord. So it's interesting that Raghunath Bhatta Goswami's answer to Mahaprabhu is, he said, I am Raghunath. I'm just your servant. It reminds me of how Srila Prabhupada filled in the information page of his passport, the first passport. I had an opportunity to see that passport. And in that passport, there's the first page you write down, your name, your place of birth, your residence, your occupation. So in Prabhupada, handwritten in his passport, when it asked for residence, Prabhupada wrote Vrindavan. But when I saw it said occupation, what was Prabhupada's occupation? He wrote servant of His Divine Grace, Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur. That's what he wrote as his occupation. So wonderful, so beautiful. So after these transcendental exchanges between Mahaprabhu and Raghunath Bhatta Goswami, very sweet exchanges, Mahaprabhu told Sri Damodar Goswami, his secretary, quote, Raghunath Bhatta Goswami will stay with me tonight here at Gambhira, witnessing my pastimes. And then tomorrow you can arrange his accommodation. He got so much association, Raghunath Bhatta Goswami. Raghunath Bhatta Goswami will stay with me tonight here at the Gambhira, witnessing my pastimes. And then tomorrow you can arrange his accommodation. Whew. So for 8 months, Raghunath Bhatta Goswami stayed in close proximity to Lord Caitanya and observed his deep spiritual emotions in the Gambhira. Now, one of his personal services included cooking for Lord Caitanya Mahaprabhu. When I was doing research for this lecture, I came across many places where it said that Raghunath Bhatta Goswami was an excellent cook. I read one acharya, he wrote, quote, Raghunath Bhatta Goswami was externally and internally a good cook. And then he explains that externally his preparations, his sabjis in particular, tasted very wonderful. And internally, his mood of service, his humility, his tolerance, and his service attitude were also very delicious. This is how he describes. Raghunath Bhatta Goswami was externally and internally a good cook. So those qualities, his mood of service, his humility, his tolerance, and his service attitude, that acharya says, they were very delicious. That's how he describes it. And recently, my good friend Hari Parshad Prabhu from the GBC Shastri Committee, I often quote him, as you know, he composed a very beautiful Sanskrit verse in this connection. Actually, I'll just be quite straightforward, he made it for this class. I told him I'm going to be speaking on Raghunath Bhatta Goswami, are there any particular verses that you can share with me, that I can share with the audience? He said, sure, here's a couple. He said, he was so inspired, he said, how about if I write one? Because he's a Sanskrit scholar. And Prabhupada wanted his followers to write about Krishna consciousness. So he wrote this very beautiful Sanskrit verse, which is connected to what I've been speaking about, how Raghunath Bhatta Goswami's a good cook. So here's the verse that he wrote just a few hours ago, actually. Chaturyam pachyane gane Srimad Bhagavatasya cha Prashidham Yasyatam Bhatta Raghunatha Prabhum Shraye. Translation. I surrender to Sri Raghunath Bhatta Prabhu, whose Chaturyam, expertise in cooking and singing of Srimad Bhagavatam, is well known. Chaturyam pachane gane Srimad Bhagavatasya cha Prashridanam tasyatam Prashidam yasyatam bhata Raghunatha padam shraye. Now, Hari Prasad Prabhu was mentioning there's a hidden meaning. It's a simple verse, right? I surrender to Sri Raghunatha Bhatta Prabhu, whose Chaturyam, expertise in cooking and singing of Srimad Bhagavatam, is well known. But he told me there's a hidden meaning in that verse. And he explained it as follows. The principal meaning of the term Chaturyam is expertise. However, it can also mean Chaturasya Bhavam. That means fourness, the quality of being four in number. So, another translation is as follows, quote, of the verse. I surrender to Sri Raghunatha Bhatta Prabhu, whose Chaturyam, fourness, in cooking and singing of Srimad Bhagavatam is well known. For it said that Raghunatha Bhatta Goswami could expertly prepare 4 types of prasadam for the Lord. That which is licked, number 1. That which is chewed, number 2. That which is drunk, number 3. And that which is sucked, number 4. It's brilliant. And at the same time, he could also sing Srimad Bhagavatam in 4 melodies. Therefore, his Chaturyam, fourness, in cooking and singing Srimad Bhagavatam. Actually, we'll hear later that when he would give Bhagavatam classes, he would sing the verses in different melodies. So there you go. 4 types of melodies and 4 types of cooking. So thank you very much, Hari Prasad Prabhu, for that wonderful verse. So in this way, Raghunatha Bhatta Goswami received the mercy of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He was cooking for him, and he was, like other associates of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu at that time, he was speaking Krishna Katha to Mahaprabhu to increase his ecstasies. So at one point, actually after 8 months, Lord Chaitanya told Raghunath Das Goswami, now you go back to Varanasi. And Raghunath Bhatta Goswami was stunned. It's described he was broken-hearted. But again, Lord Chaitanya was arranging for his devotee to feel separation. As we've many times quoted Rupa Goswami and Ujjvala, Nilamani 15:3 and 4, only when there's separation does the meeting become relishable. Separation makes the heart grow fonder. So he was doing this, Mahaprabhu was doing this with many of his associates, coming and going from Varanasi, tearing apart the heart of, or enriching the heart of Tapana Mishra, etc. And this mood of separation, actually, it was the mood of the 6 Goswamis. They were mostly in this mood of separation. And that's there in the Sad Goswami Ashtakam, because it's very clear. Quote, I offer my respectful obeisances unto the 6 Goswamis, who were chanting very loudly everywhere in Vrindavan. O Queen of Vrindavan, Radharani, O Lalita, O son of Nanda Maharaj, where are you all now? Are you just on the hill of Govardhan, or are you under the trees on the banks of the Jamuna? Where are you? These were their moods in executing Krishna consciousness. Yeah, devotees never claims, I've seen Krishna. He's always looking for Krishna because we're being trained up in this mood of separation. Even now, we're philosophically learning about it and knowing that that is the higher mood because, well, we've discussed it many times. You know, when someone's with you, there's one exchange, but when someone's separated from you, your mind is just overflowing with emotions and memories and feelings for them. So this is the perfection of Krishna consciousness. So we're in the mood like that. Where is Krishna? I read recently, one time a person said with a little tinge of pride to Prabhupada, Swamiji, Krishna came in my dream last night. And Prabhupada looked at him and said with a smile, well, next time he comes, offer my obeisances to him because I'm still searching for him, Krishna. So our mood is about separation. Kabe habe bolo se din amar. Bhaktivinoda Thakur is always saying in Saranagati, when oh when will that day be mine? So Raghunath Bhatta Goswami, he was heartbroken. He was devastated. But Chaitanya Mahaprabhu also had a practical reason. A very practical and a very, we can discuss it a little bit, for sending Raghunath Bhatta Goswami back to Varanasi. And he made it very clear. He said to him, Raghunath, try to understand, I'm sending you back to your parents. They are devotees, and they have no one in this world except you. Therefore, you should go and serve them. This is a very important instruction that we, as modern-day Vaishnavas, should follow to care for our parents. Mahaprabhu is sending Raghunath Bhatta Goswami, a renunciate, back to take care of his parents who are getting older. And we should note that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu asked his intimate associates, he asked Gopal Bhatta Goswami the same thing. You stay here in Sri Rangam until your parents depart, then you come to Vrindavan. So, Raghunath Bhatta Goswami, Gopal Bhatta Goswami, these are great generals in his mission, but you go home, take care of your parents. Actually, he told both of them when they were young not to marry, but he didn't allow them to abandon their parents. It's interesting. Rather, he expected them to care for them until they died. And if we find ourselves in such a situation, in which our aging parents, especially if they're devotees, have no one else to care for them, we have the Lord's instructions here as a guideline what to do. So now, Mahaprabhu also instructed Raghunath Bhatta Goswami to continue his meticulous study of Srimad Bhagavatam. He told him that. And to chant the holy names while he was back in Varanasi. But still, Raghunath Bhatta, you can imagine, he's been with Mahaprabhu, experiencing the highest ecstasies, or witnessing the highest ecstasies that Mahaprabhu came to experience to fulfill his mission on this earth. It's hard for him to leave. So Raghunath Bhatta Goswami, he came to Mahaprabhu in Gambhira. And he said to him, Mahaprabhu, I will take this order if I'm empowered by you. Please, Mahaprabhu, give me some of your remnants to take with me. So hearing this request from his surrendered devotee, what did Mahaprabhu do? I was thinking he could give him some prasad from the plate, some sabji or roti or something. No, Mahaprabhu took off his own neck beads. Mahaprabhu removed his neck beads and he tied them around Raghunath Bhatta Goswami's neck, saying, quote, "You don't worry. Now you will see how your words will be emboldened. You don't worry. Now you will see how your words will be emboldened." It was from this point on that Raghunath Bhatta Goswami became especially empowered to speak the Srimad Bhagavatam. Actually, if we were successful at anything in Krishna consciousness, we should never think that it's due to anything about us. It's all about our spiritual master. It's all about Srila Prabhupada. It's all about Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, our previous acharyas. We're simply the servants. We're simply acting on their behalf. And we have to make our hearts pure so the current of their transcendental mercy can flow properly and make that effect on converting people of this world to Krishna consciousness. Because that's why we live. We live to preach. The British Air Force, they have a motto, to serve, to fly. So our motto is to keep the flame burning, keep preaching so that people can understand Krishna consciousness and come with us back to the spiritual world. Leave no man behind. So Raghunath Bhatta Goswami became empowered. And for 4 years, Raghunath Bhatta Goswami served and cared for his parents until they died. And then what did he do? He came back to Puri. I keep saying he received so much mercy. Of the 6 Goswamis, I think he received the most time with Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He had the most association. And when he returned to Puri, he stayed another 8 months with Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And then when those 8 months had passed, Mahaprabhu was so pleased with him that he embraced him one day. And then he said, quote, I now empower you. That this principle of empowerment, it seems so critical to being able to do our service in Krishna consciousness. So we have to pray for that empowerment. We have to deserve it. But we have to hope for it, that we will get it, so we can be proper instruments. So he said, I now empower you to join my devotees in Vrindavan. My mother has told me not to go to Vrindavan again and stay here in Jagannath Puri. Just like you served your parents, I am serving my mother. And now I want you to do what I wanted to do in Vrindavan. Through your body, I will do it. So Raghunath Bhatta Goswami, he wanted to be very clear. He said, Mahaprabhu, what is my task? And listen to what Mahaprabhu said to him. It's in Chaitanya Charitamrita. Bhagavata pada saralala Krishna nam achire kari bhena kripa Krishna Bhagavan eta bali prabhu tanre alingana kaila prabhura karpati kripate Krishna preme matahaila. He said, quote, in Vrindavan, you should chant the Hare Krishna mantra 24 hours a day and read Srimad Bhagavatam continuously. Krishna, the Supreme Lord, will very soon bestow his mercy upon you. So from this we can see that every acharya is uniquely chosen by the Supreme Lord for a purpose. Here he received a specific instruction. You read Bhagavatam continuously. Which obviously meant that you also teach Bhagavatam, because a Brahmana learns to teach. It's to be expected what we learn we will share in Krishna consciousness. That's the nature of a Vaishnava. So we can see that Raghunath Bhatta Goswami, his particular unique contribution was Bhagavatam. To study Bhagavatam and to preach Bhagavatam. So he very happily agreed. And actually Lord Chaitanya's purpose in sending him to Vrindavan was, again, to give discourses on the Bhagavatam. We should note that in establishing his teachings, Lord Caitanya did not introduce any new texts, but rather he emphasized Srimad Bhagavatam as the basis of his Sankirtan movement and as the topmost scripture. So, as Raghunath Bhatta Goswami was leaving Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he bowed down to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and Mahaprabhu gave him 2 gifts, because remember he had asked for some prasad, he asked for something special he could take with him. So what did Mahaprabhu give him? He gave him a 14-foot long tulsi leaf garland and betel nut leaves that had been offered as prasadam to Lord Jagannath. He asked him for a gift. He gave him a 14-foot tulsi leaf garland and betel nut leaves that had been offered as prasadam to Lord Jagannath. One time Prabhupada told me, he said, the gift from a Vaishnava is a very special thing. He said that to me when in London, he very kindly, when I was leaving with another godbrother to France, we went to say goodbye to Srila Prabhupada before leaving, and I was also thinking if I could just get something from Prabhupada to just inspire me, and that's when Prabhupada gave me that instruction, preach boldly and have faith in the holy names. And then Prabhupada reached into his drawer and gave me his dhoti. And I wore that. I was a grihastra, but I wore that dhoti till it became threadbare. Sometimes the sannyasis would come through and say, "You're a grihastra, you can't wear saffron." And I'd say, try to take it off. So I can appreciate, when we get these articles, they may, some Raghunatha Bhatta Goswami got some betel nut leaves, and he got an old dried out, tulsi garland. It was 14 feet long. A gift from a Vaishnava is a very special thing. So when we're gifted, and this is part of our process, Rupa Goswami describes, exchanging gifts. We should show our love for each other by giving gifts to each other. They don't have to be expensive. They can be a tulsi leaf or flower garland, piece of cloth, but it reveals the heart of the Vaishnava, and we should cherish those gifts that come in that way. So it's described that Raghunatha Bhatta Goswami, he gathered up his few possessions and he came to say goodbye to Srila Swarup Damodar Goswami, who was the Lord's secretary. And just as he was about to leave, he asked Swarup Damodar Goswami, what exactly was the path that Caitanya Mahaprabhu took when he went to Vrindavan? What was the path he took? So, Swarup Damodar Goswami, he actually made a road map, you could say, of that path. He took a map, or he drew a map, and he indicated which villages and towns Mahaprabhu, when he originally went to Vrindavan. And as Raghunath Bhatta Goswami was traveling to Vrindavan, he would often ask people, tell me, did Mahaprabhu come through here? And when they would say, yes, he came here, then he would say, well, what did he do? And, where was he? And what was his mood? And the people would tell him, and they'd all become very blissful with Chaitanya Katha. And then it's described that Raghunath Bhatta Goswami actually wrote all of that down. He wrote all of that down along the way. And on the way it's described he was singing Ha Gora, Ha Gora, Ha Goranga, Ha Goranga, Ha Gora, Ha Gora, Ha Goranga, Ha Goranga. And when he finally arrived in Braja, Rupa and Sanatana Goswamis were there to greet him, as they often did when the illustrious personalities arrive. Such etiquette we have. We greet, we entertain, or we take care of, and then we follow the sadhu to the edge of our home or our village and see them off like this. So when he arrived, Rupa and Sanatana Goswamis were there to embrace him. And Rupa Goswami garlanded him and gave him some prasadam and said, quote, "We've heard so many wonderful things about you, Raghunath Bhatta Goswami. We've heard so many wonderful things about you." Then Raghunath Bhatta Goswami, he bowed down, he touched the lotus feet of Rupa Goswami, and he said, "How can I serve you?" And you know what Rupa Goswami said? He said, "Just speak the Srimad Bhagavatam. Just speak Srimad Bhagavatam." And that actually is all that Raghunath Bhatta Goswami, he chanted as Mahaprabhu instructed him, and he spoke Bhagavatam every day for a good part of the day. I think it's safe to say that Srimad Bhagavatam was his deity. We've been speaking for several weeks now about each of the 6 Goswamis and their personal deities. Madan Mohan, Govindaji, Gopinath, Radharaman, Govardhan Shilas. But who was Raghunath Bhatta Goswami's deity? It's never mentioned he had a deity. His deity was the Bhagavatam. And we can say that because Chaitanya Mahaprabhu taught his followers that Srimad Bhagavatam, like the deity and like the Mahamantra, is non-different from Krishna. If only because hearing it puts one in immediate contact with the Lord. In the Srimad Bhagavatam Mahatmya of the Padma Purana, it said, Sadasevya, Sadasevya, Srimad Bhagavati Atikata, Srimad Bhagavat Atikata, Yasha Shravana Matrena, Haris Chitam Samas Rayat. Quote, Srimad Bhagavatam must be read and heard at every step, because just by hearing and reading it, the Supreme Lord, Sri Krishna, himself manifests in the heart. Wow. Srimad Bhagavatam must be read and heard at every step, because just by hearing or reading it, the Supreme Lord, Sri Krishna himself manifests in the heart. If there was an actual deity that Raghunath Bhatta Goswami was very attached to, I was reading, it was Rupa Goswami's Govindaji. Because Raghunath Bhatta Goswami could often be found preparing beautiful ornaments for Govindaji, like a flute, it's described, or earrings. And he would always speak Srimad Bhagavatam in Govindaji's presence. So Bhagavatam was his deity. Like one time I asked my dear godbrother, Radhanath Swami, I was carrying my deity, so I said to him, So Maharaj, what deity do you worship? I have here my Misringa Dev, and I have a Govardhan Shila here, and this is some years ago. So what deity do you have? So Maharaj, he pulled out his Japavis. He said, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. The holy name is my deity. Kali Kali Nam Rup Krishna Avatar. That the Supreme Lord has appeared in this age of Kali as the holy names. Thank you so much, Radhanath Swami. So in this way, Bhagavatam, that was the deity of Raghunath Bhatta Goswami. And he became very famous, more famous and more famous and more famous for his Bhagavatam recitations. I was reading even Rupa and Sanatana Goswamis would attend his Bhagavatam recitations while he was in Vrindavan for many, many years. It's described they were spellbound by his expressions of love for Krishna. And again, the medieval poet Radha Ballabha Das, he writes in his Bharati Raga, he writes, Shakala Vaishnava Sange Yamuna Puline Range Ekatraha Haya Paryashuke Shri Bhagavata Kata Amrita Samana Gata Niravadi Shunayara Mukhe. Quote, these two Goswamis, along with all other Vaishnavas, assembled in great joy at the banks of the Jamuna and heard the nectar like pastimes of Srimad Bhagavatam regularly from the mouth of Raghunath Bhatta Goswami. It's mentioned there. He actually mentions that Rupa and Sanatana Goswamis, along with all other Vaishnavas assembled in great joy on the banks of the Jamuna and heard the nectar-like pastimes of Srimad Bhagavatam regularly from Raghunath Bhatta Goswami. And then he says, Parama Vairagya Simha Su Nirmala Krishna Prema Shushvara Amrita Maya Vani Pashu Pakshu Pulakita Yara Mukha Katamrita Shinite Pashana Hayapani. Quote, Sri Raghunath Bhatta Goswami was the pinnacle of renunciation and at the same time was possessed of the choicest love for Krishna. The choicest love for Krishna. His voice was nectar personified. Hearing nectarian pastimes from his mouth, even the birds and animals of Vrindavan displayed symptoms of ecstasy, and the stones would melt away. Wow. Let's recite that again. Sri Raghunatha Bhatta Goswami was the pinnacle of renunciation, and at the same time was possessed of the choicest love for Krishna. His voice was nectar personified. Hearing nectarian pastimes from his mouth, even the birds and animals of Vrindavan displayed symptoms of ecstasy, and the stones would melt away. Sri Raghunatha Bhatta Goswami ki jai. I read that whenever Raghunath Bhatta Goswami spoke the Bhagavatam, he would wear that tulsi garland given to him by the Lord, 14-foot tulsi garland. And again, he would recite each verse 3 or 4 times in different tunes. And as he spoke of the beauty and the sweetness of Krishna, he would often be overwhelmed by love. It's described his faltering voice, his trembling and tears would often force him to end his recitation. He couldn't go on. He couldn't go on. His faltering voice, his trembling and his tears would force him to end his recitation. And again, because connect everything to Prabhupada in our lives. I remember when Prabhupada visited us in Paris, again at 4 Rue Le Sour, he was singing Jai Radha Madhava. Jai Radha Madhava, Kunja Bihari, Gopi Janabalaba. And then he stopped. Gopi Janabalaba. I was sitting right in front of him and he was on the Vyasasana. He was going to give the Bhagavatam class. Gopi Janabalaba. And then Prabhupada started trembling. And the tears were coming down his face like that. And as a neophyte devotee, still am, I thought Prabhupada was having a stroke. And then I realized I'm seeing the symptoms of ecstatic love of an eternal resident of Vrindavan. And Prabhupada was like that. And his tears were coming like that. And they were going on to his top piece that he was wearing. And same thing. Sometimes, generally pure devotees, they don't show their symptoms of love of God because they don't want the public to follow them for the wrong reason. They want the public to follow them for the divine knowledge they're giving. But sometimes it just gushes forth like a spring. We saw that several times. I remember one time Prabhupada was giving Bhagavatam class, Chaitanya Charitamrita class in Mayapur, at the Mayapur festival, to thousands of devotees. And he also stopped speaking. He was speaking about the mercy of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And he stopped. And we were all just like, wow. And at one point, one of my godbrothers took the drum. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swamin Iti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pasyachate Satan. And Prabhupada woke up. He came out of his trance. And he said, that's all. Like that. So we were fortunate. I mean, Raghunath Bhatta Goswami, Rupa Goswami, Sanatana Goswami, sometimes their love just overflowed. And how would, that was 500 years ago. But to see that, or just to hear about that, is so purifying, so convincing. I think seeing Srila Prabhupada, just 2 feet away from me, exhibiting these symptoms of love of God, these pure, for me that was the most convincing factor in my life about the authenticity of Krishna consciousness and my desire to follow my spiritual master back home, back to Goloka Vrindavan. If there's anything, that was the convincing factor. Yes, Krishna consciousness is real, and I want to serve him. I want to serve him, and I want to follow him. back to the spiritual world and serve his ecstasies in the spiritual world. And then that he was crying and his tears went onto his top piece. And so I made a note of that. And then when later, when it came time to wash Prabhupada's clothes, I asked the Mataji who was taking the clothes, I said, "Can I wash them?" She said, "No." I said, "Well, just give me the top piece for a moment." And I took that top piece and I sucked on the tears of that. Hare Krishna. So that was the nature of his talks, that they were just full of prema. And it's said that one time when Gopal Bhatta Goswami was speaking about the Giriraj, he was speaking Govardhan Leela, the tears were streaming from his eyes as he was speaking. So he said, quote, "My heart," he's so humble, "my heart is like a mountain of anarthas. My eyes are like clouds of devastation," comparing to the pastime. "And my tears are the rain shower of Indra. May Lord Krishna please purify me by his touch and lift me out of my desperate state." Yeah, he was crying while he was speaking about Govardhan Leela. And he said, "My heart is like a mountain of anarthas, and my eyes are like clouds of devastation, and my tears are the rain shower of Indra. May Lord Krishna purify me by his touch and lift me out of my desperate state." Such great devotees, extreme devotion, but extreme humility. And as he was speaking, his tears drenched the parchment that he was reading from, causing the verse to become smudged. And at that point, Raghunath Bhatta Goswami stopped and he stared at that blank space, because the next verse that he was supposed to read about Govardhan Leela, it wasn't there. And he looked up and he said anxiously, quote, do any of you have another copy of this book? I will die without knowing what's coming up next. He was so eager to hear the Leelas, this greed. We also have to have this, we have to develop this Leela, because that it's there, but it depends upon the intensity of our greed to hear about it and to imbibe that mood ourselves. That's how we become purified. Depends on the quality of our hearing. So he said, does anyone have another copy of this book? Because I'll die without knowing what's the next verse, because it had disappeared. Raghunath Bhatta Goswami ki. Now, Sri Raghunath Bhatta Goswami never wrote any books. It's described that he was so absorbed hearing, chanting, and remembering the Bhagavatam that the thought of writing any other book never entered his mind. He was a Bhagavatam devotee through and through. Just like Sanatana Goswami. Great minds think alike. We know when we heard many months ago when Sanatana Goswami was 5, I think it was, he had a dream. And in the dream, a Brahmana came and gave him a Bhagavatam. When he woke up in the morning, there was a knock on the door. He answered the door in his house, and there was the Brahmana and gave him the Bhagavatam. And we know that he studied Bhagavatam when he was under the rule of the Muslim king in Ramkeli, Hussein Shah. And he preached Bhagavatam. And he wrote Brihat Bhagavatamritam based on the Bhagavatam. So great minds think alike. For these Goswamis, this Bhagavatam was their life and soul. So Bhagavatam was the life and soul of Raghunath Bhatta Goswami, just like it was Sanatana Goswami. And we have those beautiful, just so we can appreciate what was their love. Sanatana Goswami shared his love for the Bhagavatam for us in an appendix to his illustrious Krishna Lila Shtava. In his Krishna Lila Shtava, he writes, many of you know these verses, but it's important so we can appreciate what they love, so we can learn to love it. Sanatana Goswami writes in Krishna Lila Shtava, O Srimad Bhagavatam, O nectar churned from the ocean of all the Vedic scriptures, you are the most prominent transcendental fruit of the Vedas and are enriched with the jewels of all philosophical conclusions. You grant spiritual vision to all people of the world and are the very life breath of the Vaishnava devotees. O Lord, you are the sun which has risen to dispel the darkness of Kali Yuga. Actually, you are Krishna, who has returned amongst us. O Srimad Bhagavatam, I offer my respectful obeisances unto you. By your recitation one attains transcendental bliss, because your syllables shower down pure love of God. You are to be served by everyone, always, for you are an incarnation of Lord Krishna. O Srimad Bhagavatam, O my only friend, companion, and teacher, O my great wealth and deliverer, O my good fortune and bliss, I offer respectful obeisances unto you. O Srimad Bhagavatam, O bestower of saintliness to the unsaintly, O uplifter of the most fallen, please never leave me. Accompanied by pure love of Krishna, please manifest yourself in my heart and my throat. Hare Krishna. Srila Sanatana Goswami Prabhupada ki. Krishna Lila Shtava ki. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki. Raghunatha Bhatta Goswami ki. The Six Goswamis of Vrindavan ki. Hare Krishna. All the Vaishnavas ki. So as he grew older, Raghunath Bhatta Goswami took up residence at Radhakund, where where he continued his Srimad Bhagavatam discourses, and from where he ultimately entered the transcendental realm of Goloka Vrindavan to continue, or these pastimes are going on simultaneously actually, but to serve as Ragamanjari, his Ishtadev, Vrindavaneshwari Shrimati Radharani. So he entered he left this world in the year of 1580. I read he was 77 years of age. And there's actually a description about when he left his body, like you could say a final instruction. When Raghunath Bhatta Goswami was leaving his body on the shores of Radhakund, he was chanting the holy name. The Srimad Bhagavatam was on his chest. He had that 14-foot Tulsi garland around his neck. He had the Tulsi Kanta, the neck beads of Caitanya Mahaprabhu around his neck. He had that betel nut pan leaves in his hand. And he was surrounded by a group of loving devotees who were loudly chanting, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Wow. What a final instruction. We have instructions from the cradle to the grave. We have no excuse not to become Krishna conscious in this lifetime. We can't dilly-dally around. It's an old phrase, but life's so short and we have such a golden opportunity. We can't be distracted even for a moment, because the mercy is so great that even in our fallen condition, at least in my fallen condition, there's a chance we can make it. As I've many times said, Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur said in a lecture in the 1930s, I see no reason why all my disciples cannot go back to Godhead in one lifetime. So it doesn't mean by his saying it's going to happen, but the onus is on us to take advantage of Mahaprabhu's instructions to Raghunath Bhatta Goswami. Chant continuously the holy names, read Bhagavatam continuously, speak the Bhagavatam continuously, spread the mercy. So we should mention that he departed in that year, what was it, 1580. He left in 1580, but we should mention that he was so closely connected to Rupa Goswami and Srila Sanatana Goswami that all three of them left the same year, a separation from one another. Raghunatha Bhatta Goswami, Rupa Goswami, and Sanatana Goswami all left within a short time of each other. It's described because they couldn't bear the separation. Sanatana Goswami left in the month of Ashada Mas, which means July and August. Rupa Goswami then left the next month, Shravana Masa, August and September. And Raghunath Bhatta Goswami, he finally left in the next month, Ashvina Mas, October, November. They all left the same year. Wow. That shows how much mutual love they had for each other. They couldn't tolerate each other's separation. Also, Raghunath Bhatta Goswami, Raghunath Das Goswami, and Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami, they all left the world on the same day, Ashvini Shukla Dvadasi, just before Kartik, but in different years, in 3 different years. They left the world on the same day. So transcendental. Dear devotees, I would like to conclude today and conclude our discussions. It's like painful, actually, that we have to conclude our discussions on the 6 Goswamis. I think the only solace is to return or to speak about them again and again and again is Svadhu, Svadhu, Pade, Pade. When we go on our Kartik Parikamas or we visit different holy places like Mayapur or Jagannath Puri, we'll just tell the pastimes again. They'll be ever fresh. So I would like to conclude today with the words that Srinivasacharya, who came to Vrindavan later, we mentioned that the other day, Srinivas Narottam Shamananda Pandit, they came to Vrindavan. So I'd like to conclude today with the words that Srinivasacharya expressed on his visit to Raghunath Bhatta Goswami's Samadhi. What did he say? And we'll end with these words. He said, "As I look upon the Samadhi of Raghunath Bhatta, my heart breaks and my eyes are awash with tears. But as soon as I remember Raghunath Bhatta's glories, I am overjoyed. Who could not be? He was such an expert teacher of all the scriptures, and even Brihaspati would joyfully cheer upon hearing Raghunath Bhatta Goswami's explanations of Gaudiya Vaishnava literature. There is nothing to which his discourses on Srimad Bhagavatam can be compared. Even Vyasa himself wished to sit and listen to him speak, knowing that by doing so, it would bring him the deepest happiness." Hare Krishna. Thank you, Srinivasacharya. Thank you, Raghunath Bhatta Goswami. Thank you, the 6 Goswamis of Vrindavan, for taking up the instructions of Caitanya Mahaprabhu to establish Braj so we can come there and be inspired to go back to the Western countries and continue spreading your messages all over this world. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki. So we'll be back in a few days. Shri Gauranitai ki, Shri Krishna Balaram ki, Shri Radhashama Sundar ki, Vrindavaneshwari Srimati Radharani ki, Srila Prabhupada ki, Sri Raghunath Bhatta Goswami ki, Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki, back home, back to Godhead ki, everybody with us ki. Jai Jai Sisi Radhe Sharm. Haribol, thank you.